rescue, revamp, create. The Art of Drum Synthesis. The new course is available at Letsynthesize Academy.
Yo, the Larson here, welcome to the newest Synthesize Sunday episode. And because lots of you guys requested, today I want to talk about how to distort like space laces through this little thing I made. All the drums are coming from operator in this clip, by the way. And go to my Patreon if you want to grab the whole project, and click here. I have awesome start to finish courses on dubstep, but right now let's jump into it. Yo, so here's this beat once again. Why do we use distortion? Simply because distortion creates harmonics that creates perceived loudness. Here is a pure sine wave. As you can see, it has one harmonic. What happens if I start adding some analog clip or analog saturation to it? Beautiful higher harmonics are added to it. And with this, you perceive the sound being louder. We can mimic this effect by simply trying to draw in the higher harmonics that we just saw here. Now it will be a little hard to replicate, but let's try it. So let's go with every odd. So as you can see, the added higher harmonics are a little different, but the point here is that we were able to create some extra perceived loudness by adding extra harmonics to this pure sine wave. And this is the point of distortion. Now, if you want to use distortion in a clever way, you must know and you must accept this fact that you are creating perceived loudness. And sometimes it is a lot easier to achieve this goal by using a different effect or a different process. Because let's face it, if you have a boring sound, like this. Let's apply the soft clip. It got louder, but it doesn't sound better at all. So distortion is not always the key to make you sound better and louder and stronger. Because I bet you want to create loud and fat but also clean sounds, not like loud but garbage sounds. And when I analyze Space Lace's songs, I realize that the dude does not always distort that much, but he creates perceived loudness in a very, very clever way. So based on what I saw, I created this little clip that I already played it to you in the beginning of this video, and I exported it. My favorite way to create perceived loudness is adding some fake amplitude modulation. Let's have a look at this kick and the surrounding of it. You can see here that something weird is happening, and that is because I applied an auto pen that vibrates the sound. So basically it's just a volume slider dragging up and down, and if you set it to a quite high frequency, it can create a perceived vibration, amplitude modulation. If the low frequency of the kick amplitude modulated everything else, when you compress and process everything together, all the basses, the kick, the effects, synth, everything. So I wanted to replicate this effect. This is why I went into the bass group, and this is why the auto pen is here. All I did was just automated the amount. So here you can see this is only the bass group, and without that you can hear that the bass group sounds the same, but with the auto pen I was able to replicate this sort of heavy compressed, heavy saturated sound on top of the kick. I think it sounds great. I also did the same on the snare too. It's not that obvious based on the waveform, but it can add some really nice effect if you want to achieve that heavily compressed, heavily saturated sound. You may tell me that, okay, but this is applicable only on a bass group, not on individual sounds, so make them fatter and louder. Okay, so here comes my second tip. Let's take this sound, the main bass. Okay, so originally this was the sound. I added the sub, and altogether they sounded nice. But it could be louder and fatter. And this is why I applied a simple noise layer. And this is what I saw in Spaceless's song a lot of times. He was able to layer noises on anywhere to make the sound really wide and fat and loud. And this is the noise that I applied here. With the sub. So with the noise, without the noise. Obviously, you need to be really careful on how to process the noise. As you can see, I had to cut the lows, the mid-range, the mid-high range at about 3K, and everything below. But when you apply this on key parts of your song, it can create a huge difference. Now let's go over how I made this sound, the main bass inside Serum, that I resampled and used it in a sampler. So this is how the original sounds. In most of the cases, especially with dubstep sounds, dubstep basses, compression, especially OTT, can create a lot better result than, you know, heavily distorting your sound. Now, some sort of distortion can come handy, can add slight, really good sounding higher harmonics, but this is not always the key. But what I experienced in the years is applying clever process like OTTs and other effects can bring a lot better result than heavily distorting your sound. Some sort of slight distortion can be cool, that can create nice higher harmonics, but be careful with that. But instead, you know, just play with filters, compressors, and other effects like flangers, reverb filters, and whatever you want basically. So this is the key here without the OTT. It's not bad, but with an OTT, some slight saturation, 5 decibel, and especially with the reverb, it can create a really huge sound. The preset itself is super simple. It's just this weird wavetable FMing sine wave with the sub oscillator. And the synth mode is activated here. And in the FX, I only have a flanger. And that is what I meant. If I deactivate the flanger, that creates higher harmonics again. It's really nice metallic higher overtones. The sound changes completely. Especially if I deactivate the hyper too. So as you can see, it's really stupid. And this is what I meant, that when we want to create fat sounds, you don't and you mustn't always think about distortion. You want to think about how can I add extra higher overtones, extra voices, for example, that add perceived loudness. And for example, creating noise using, for example, the hyper creates the same illusion, and with the flanger. Now this bass didn't get louder, but definitely sounding better. And after this, if I add some extra slight saturation, and the sound didn't get that louder, but we definitely were able to create some fatness to it. Now before that, an OTT, the sound definitely got louder. So as you can see, distortion is not always the case, especially when I checked Spaceless's songs. I realized that distortion is not the key, but you guys were always interested in how to achieve that sound that Spaceless is really famous about. Now let's talk about the drums a little bit, because the drum section is completely synthesized, so there is no sample here, and I used operator for the kick, for the snare, for the hats, and these tone fillers that sound this. Now these drums are saturated, so as you can hear, the kick itself sounds really heavily compressed and saturated. But that is cool because it created the mid-range, and that is what is really important when you distort basses or low frequencies. It creates the higher harmonics that are really intense in the mid-range. And that is what I wanted to achieve here, especially with the kick. I wanted to have that, you know, mid-range heavy sound that cuts through the mix, especially in this musical surrounding. Because without the saturator, you can hear the mid-range. Let me try to boost it for you a little. So this is the frequency range that the saturator created. And I cheated a bit because inside operator filter, I applied the filter drive, because if I deactivate it, the kick turns super clean. And I don't even like that. So it was at around 2.3. but I wanted to add some extra distortion in the filter drive. And that created that mid-range that sounds so good when you want the kick cut through the mix. The same thing with the snare. I have the body and the tail, both coming from operator, and the tail is more like a fem than a simple white noise. Now the body is simply just a sine wave with an operator FMing only the transient or creating the transient. But the point here that I want to talk about is the filter drive again, because without that, it's just too simple. So let me show it to you in the context. But with some extra drive and filter, and what it creates is mid-range. Now distortion is so cool because if you apply it on a low frequency instrument like a pure sine wave or this snare body, it can create really nice mid-range too. Now keep in mind that if your sound has lots of higher overtones, like noise or mid-range synth or whatever, it can create a different sound. It can easily turn into noise. So if I crank up the drive here, you will hear what I mean. The mid frequencies and mid-high and of course the high frequencies just take over. So this is why when you apply this type of saturation, so really heavy distortion on an instrument, what we want to do is pull back or filter or just EQ the input source. That is really important if you don't want to turn your sound into noise. So this is why fat tracks can be really helpful for you. Now when you build up a fat track, what you want to do is apply several different types of distortion that creates really tiny higher harmonics or different series of higher harmonics that can add together and create a little fatter sound. Especially when you compress it and add other effects, it can create a really cool sound. But this is not a rule, so you cannot put it on everything and expect that all the sounds will sound fat and wide and big after the fat rack. But in some cases it can be really helpful. I'm not going to build up a fat rack now, but if you're curious, check here, I made a few videos on fat tracks. Now one more thing, let me talk about the sub. That is obviously really important in today's music, in today's especially dubstep or drum bass or heavy bass heavy music. That is crucial to nail. Let's go back to the main bass. And because this bass is on a really low note, as you can see, it is on D sharp 0, it is crucial to apply something that creates the harmonies that we really need to be able to cut through the mix with the sub. And this is how the sub sounds. So as you can see, I use one sine wave, but again, in the filter section, I use the sine shaper. That is so smart. You can have the same thing in Serum too, by the way. Because what it does is it creates the higher overtones that we need. Let me deactivate the filter emulation. So as you can see, it creates the third harmonic and the fifth or sixth harmonic. I can't really tell. How do I know this? Let me deactivate the sine shaper. If I go here and if I apply the third harmonic, we were able to add almost the same effect. Let's go with the next one. Okay, we don't need the fourth. And this is so cool because we were able to create almost the same effect that we had using the sine shaper. Now if I add the sine shaper back, obviously this is too much, especially if I add the filter emulation. This is too much, but you get the idea. The point here is to create the series of higher harmonics that we really need. And that can be different on subs, on mid basses, on vocals and everything else. So using the best type of distortion is crucial. This is why I don't suggest you to just, put saturation, put overdrive on anything and expect to sound it better, because it won't. You need to be thoughtful and you need to have some sort of experience or ear training that if you want to boost, join my Discord through Patreon, where I can teach you and when I can give you feedbacks and stuff like this. The community there is really cool and vivid. Right, so grab this project on my Patreon below and click here for the dubstep start to finish courses. People love it. See you guys next time. Peace.